You may or may not know that some of us Christians spend a lot of time hoping we get the chance to tell the people we know more about what we've become so passionate about, which is Jesus. But we feel torn between two sides, and on the one side, it's that we want to respect people, and we don't want to press things on people who aren't interested in them. We don't want to force things on people. But on the other side, because we've become convinced that what we've found is so true, and because we really believe it's what everyone needs to hear, we can't help but feel obligated that we have to find a way to talk to people. And there's so many times I wish the people I know, whether I've known them a long time or a little time, so many times I wish I could just say, could we just sit down for half an hour? Would you be willing to talk to me about Jesus for a little bit? But sometimes those times never come. Life is busy. Sometimes those connections just never happen. And that's why I'm making this video. Because whether it's coming from me, you know me, or you've met me, or whether someone else sent this to you because it's what they wish they could sit down and talk to you about, I just want to give you the chance to hear, hopefully, a clear picture of this Jesus thing. If you're not interested and you're not willing, you're not going to listen to this, you've not offended me. If you know me, you don't need to feel awkward around me that you weren't interested in listening. But I would ask you, even if you think there is a 99% chance that this is all junk and Christianity is stupid and this Jesus thing is moronic, but there's 1% of you that says, I'm not sure if I've really understood this, and I don't know if I've come to the right conclusions about this. Maybe you've even grown up around the church, but you're not really sure if you've understood this. And then I just beg you to give me a little of your time. And listen, I believe God wants everyone to get the chance to hear clearly this message. And we live in crazy times. I don't know how much time I have in life, how much time you have in life. I want you to have the chance to hear and you decide what you do with it. But that's why I'm making this. Regardless of what people believe about him, it's pretty safe to say that Jesus is a big deal. 1/3 of the world's population in some way associate themselves with him. And, there have been other people in history that have claimed to be God, but we don't know most of their names because when they died, the movements they had died out not long after them. But Jesus, on the other hand, has become one of the most influential people in all of history. I want to read a quote from a historian, H.G. Wells. He says, "I am a historian. I'm not a believer. But I must confess as a historian that this penniless preacher from Nazareth," that's Jesus, "is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all of history." So even as an unbeliever, this historian has come to the conclusion, yeah, Jesus is the most dominant figure. Jesus has left behind a movement that has continued to grow, and geographically it's gone all over the world, gone into all kinds of cultures and all kinds of races, which makes you wonder, what if so many people found so convincing? If there is a God, if there's a possibility there's a God, and if there's a possibility he visited Earth at one point, then your investigative energy couldn't really go anywhere better than to Jesus, because he truly has left a stamp that has continued to change the world. I don't want to make this really long, but on the other side, I don't want to give you this cheap plastic version of Jesus. That's part of the reason I'm making this, because when I try to find something to send to my friends, I think, oh, I wish it said more, or I wish it didn't just zoom in on this little piece. And maybe that's just the way we are as people. We'd like to share what we've found most convincing, but I want to give you the big picture, the best I can, of really who this Jesus is. You may have heard this phrase, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're talking about. To just make a few terms clear, the word gospel, we might know of gospel music, it's like a genre of music, but this word gospel means good news. When you spread good news about something happening, or that has happened. The word Christ also is a word that I thought growing up was maybe Jesus' last name. Jesus Christ, is that Jesus his first name and Christ his last name. But actually the word Christ is a title. It's a title for a king. And so the gospel of Jesus Christ is like saying the good news about King Jesus. So we'll talk more about that. But to understand Jesus better, you have to get a picture of the world he was born into at his time. He was born a Jew into Israel, as a lot of you guys probably know. But Israel wasn't independent, it was the era of the Roman Empire. So the Romans had dominion over many people, including them. So they were allowed to have their customs and things, but they didn't have independence as a nation. The Jews had a lot of scriptures, a lot of kind of holy writings, and that's what, in modern language, when we talk about the Bible, the Old Testament is the collection of Jewish scriptures at the time of Jesus. And so what I want to point out and hopefully make clear is, while we just talked about, we look back in history at Jesus as one of the most dominant figures, if not the most influential person in all of history, and we say, wow, this person really changed everything. On the other side of history, before Jesus, in these scriptures, they were looking forward to and expecting someone to come like Jesus, which is a pretty crazy thought. So the Hebrew scriptures say that God made this world and that he put the first humans into this beautiful garden, and that God himself would come and walk with them and talk with them. And they had this relationship of trust and closeness with God, and that he would lead them by his wisdom. But it says that they were tempted and they chose to distrust God, and they chose to disobey God. And from that point, the Hebrew scriptures show that basically from one person to the next and from one nation to the next, you see humanity just kind of spiraling out of control, and so much destruction and death and pain and all these problems. This is the Hebrew understanding of why the world is such a messed up place. So at one point, God chooses to show himself, to talk to this guy named Abraham, who you may have heard of. And God promises Abraham a couple things. He says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And he also says that from your ancestry or your family tree, all of the nations in the world are going to be blessed. You're going to do something good for all these nations. And Abraham, has kids that have kids that have kids that have kids, and does become a nation, the nation of Israel. And God also speaks to people in that nation called prophets and gives them messages, and they write them down, these messages God gave them, and they get laws from God of how they should live. But But the Hebrew scriptures actually record that the Jews actually didn't do a good job obeying those laws. And so God's promise had come true that Abraham had become a great nation now, but it was still kind of yet to be seen how all the nations of the earth would be blessed through them. Later, one of Israel's greatest kings, David, gets another promise from God. And he gets promised that someone from his family would be given a kingdom that would last forever. So not only do the Jews have this idea that all nations are supposed to be blessed through them, even though they themselves didn't really show themselves to be any better than the other nations, but that someone now from David's line would get this kingdom that would last forever, which is kind of an interesting thing, because if every king dies someday, how do you have a king or a kingdom that's going to go on forever? Anyway, we could go through a lot of these different prophecies and scriptures, but I want to do one more. There was a prophet named Daniel, and he said, getting it from God, that there was going to be 4 great empires, starting with the one that he was living under, which was the Babylonian Empire, Babylon. And that each of them would rise and fall, and in the days of the 4th empire, God would set up a kingdom that would last forever. So it kind of matches David's promise. So, historically, Babylon did fall. It fell to the Medes and the Persians. They were the second kingdom. Eventually they fell, and the third kingdom was Greece. Alexander the Great took over their empire. And then the Greeks were taken over by the Romans, the 4th empire. So if what Daniel heard was correct, then in the days of the Roman Empire, God was about to set up some kind of indestructible kingdom. Enter Jesus. That's when he comes. So, if you open up a Bible to the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew is the first book there. It opens up like this. First chapter, first verse. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So you can see he opens up by saying, I'm going to tell you first the family tree of this Jesus, the Christ, this king, who is the son of David, that means an ancestor of David, and the son of Abraham, an ancestor of Abraham. So then he's going to go on and list all these names of their family tree to trace them back, which actually, if you read the Bible the first time, you're just like, why are these long lists here of names? This is really boring to read. But what Matthew's showing you is that Jesus' family that he's born into goes all the way back to David, who got the promise for this coming king, the Christ, and that the family continues all the way back to Abraham, who got the promise that someone from his family would bless all of the nations. Quite intriguing. So, Jesus' first message then, here in the Gospel of Matthew, is to tell the people, repent, which means to change your thinking and get serious with God. He says, because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So if you were a Jew, having all these scriptures that we just touched on, that would be like setting off lights in your head saying, oh, that king, the kingdom, it's happening now. Again, just like Daniel said it would. Let me pause for a moment just to reflect on how big of a deal this is again. We, a bunch of people in the 21st century, again, are looking back at this incredible human that has maybe changed history more than anyone else. And what are the chances that that same person is a person that Daniel got prophecies about when his kingdom would start, which was about 500 years before Jesus came, And David got prophecies about this king that would come from his family, which was almost 1,000 years before Jesus. And that Abraham had promises that someone would come that would bless all the nations. And that was nearly 2,000 years before Christ. You see what I'm saying? The same way we look back, they were looking forward to this stuff happening. And what are the chances that it all matches, if that makes sense? There's Roman historians from the Roman times, like Tacitus and Suetonius, and they say also that in the Eastern countries, the Orient, that they had rumors that a universal empire was supposed to be given to some of the men of Judah, which is a part of Israel at that time. And we don't know why they had that rumor, but it may have been because Babylon, you remember Daniel was under Babylon's rule. And if they kept his writings, which predicted that under basically the Fourth Empire, the Roman Empire, this would happen, that may be of what made those rumors take place. And that may be why the wise men, we know in the Christmas story, the wise men come from the east and ask, where is this king born of the Jews? And actually the Jews don't even know what's happened. And they say, we don't know. But the scriptures, again, they had their scriptures, and they said, the scriptures say that he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem, which is a little town outside of Jerusalem. And again, that prophecy was written down like 700 years before Jesus came, that this great king, this Christ king, was supposed to come and be born into this town of Bethlehem. So these guys from the east go and they find this middle-class family, working-class family with this little kid. And it must have been a shock to them why the Jews hadn't recognized that their king had been born, and also why this kid wasn't being born into a palace or something. But that's how he was born. So the Bible has 4 different historical records of Jesus' life in it. These are what we call the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We just call them that because it's the first names of the guys who wrote them down. You may or may not be aware that the Bible is actually 66 different books that have been collected into one thing that we call the Bible. But originally they were all separate documents, separate historical documents and prophecies and letters, and they were all collected into one. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the historical accounts of Jesus' life. 2 of those are written by guys who were some of Jesus' closest friends and followers. And the other 2 are written by guys who were close with Jesus' friends and followers. So all of them are very close to Jesus. And that's important because if you want to learn about any historical figure, you want to learn from the people who knew that person and who were not separated by a big gap of time. These books were all written down within 20 or 30 years after Jesus was gone. So they weren't something that, it wasn't the kind of situation that some people think that maybe Jesus was kind of special, but then they kind of added to the stories and the stories kept getting better, and later you have this legendary figure who's done all these amazing things. No, all of these documents and some of the other New Testament documents also show that it didn't take long at all to see that this is what they were all convinced of. It wasn't something that grew over time. So that's where you can learn about Jesus from the best sources. There's some things like what's called the Gospel of Thomas, which is written much later. And so that person, whoever wrote it, could not have known Jesus or could not have known Jesus' close followers. So that's why a lot of people say, well, that's not the best kind of source to go get information from. But so I've met people that they had been told or they believed that Jesus was just made up, that he wasn't really a historical figure. And I want you to know there's non-Christian historical sources that mention Jesus and mention many of the things about him that the documents in the Bible do. I'm going to list some out for you, so you know. I'm not promising perfect pronunciation, but Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, Phlegon, Bar Serapion, Tacitus, and Thales, and Cellus, and Josephus. Everything ends in an us. And the Talmud. So those are some places people can find non-Christian references to the life of Jesus. But when we read these documents from the people who were closest to him, you really see why his life was worth documenting. Besides the unusual circumstances of his birth, these guys record what they saw Jesus do, that he was healing all kinds of people with all kinds of diseases and sicknesses and, problems. Just masses of people. And there's even stories of him doing things like stopping a funeral procession and going over to the casket and telling the guy, "Get up," and the guy comes back to life. So there's just a myriad of these stories of him healing people with all kinds of problems and even raising people from the dead. They record Jesus doing these things that totally suspend the laws of nature, walking out on the water to meet his disciples on the boat, just walking on the surface of the water. They record him feeding thousands and thousands of people, starting with just a basket of food. And, when he blesses it and they hand it out, it just keeps multiplying. Some of these are just huge public miracles that were hard to fake. It records Jesus sometimes telling the weather what to do, and the weather would obey him, that he would say, "Calm down," and the storm would just chill out. And then his followers were they were scared of the storm, but then they were more scared of him because they're thinking, what category of guy is this that we're with? Even these people with, these demons and demonic spirits, Jesus would just approach them, and the spirits that were in these people would freak out, and they'd say, "We know who you are," and they would panic and beg Jesus not to torture them. At one point, Jesus even is on a mountaintop with 3 of his closest friends, and he just transforms into this, kind of luminescent, bright, shining being. And they hear a voice out of the cloud that says, "This is my son, listen to him." And so they did listen, and that's why they didn't record just what he did, but also the things he said. Jesus' teaching was centered around this kingdom of God that they had been expecting. It seems like most of the Jews had envisioned their coming king as kind of a military ruler who would come and gather them, and they would throw down the Romans and take power and become this huge empire. But strangely enough, I just mentioned the incident when he fed thousands of people with just this little basket of food. And it actually says that after he did that, they tried to force him to become their king. It's like, oh, maybe they're getting the picture. But Jesus hid from them. And at other times, he would tell them things like, you're not going to say, "Oh, there's the kingdom over there. There it is over there." It was like a different kind of kingdom. But he said it was already among them. The kingdom was already among them. And instead of calling them, to war and throwing down the Romans, he was calling them to repent. Again, that means to change your mind, to turn away from your own way of living and back to God, like humanity was supposed to be from the beginning. He's calling him to repent, and so much of his teaching was focused on a right heart. A lot of non-Christians, their biggest thing that they don't like about Christianity is hypocrites. People who pretend to be something that they're clearly not. And I think a lot of them would be surprised to know that actually Jesus' strongest, most angry words were to hypocrites. He agrees with those people that there's almost nothing he hated more than people pretending to be religious while not really caring about loving God, not really caring about loving people. And Jesus scolded them. The more you see his teachings, you see that he was actually demanding their obedience as a king, but he didn't want to rule their political system. He wanted to actually rule their hearts. The Romans were not their problem. The poison of their heart, their own selfishness and refusal to submit to God, was their problem. And that was the Romans' problem too. It was every country's problem. And Jesus said they needed to learn to treat this independent, selfish, messed up life like the plague, and to learn again to trust and submit to God. So a lot of people start looking at Jesus and they say, okay, this is amazing, but maybe he's just this good teacher. Well, if you think about it, it just doesn't work. First of all, we've seen that the people who knew him recorded he does stuff that no one else can do usually. Not just that, but he actually claimed stuff about himself. The things he said about himself were things that if any other human teacher said, you'd stop listening to them because you'd be like, yeah, you're crazy. I can't believe that about you. Listen, I'm going to list off some things. One, that he had the authority to forgive sins. Okay? The only person who can forgive a wrong done is the person who the wrong has been done to. So he's like putting himself in God's place by saying, I forgive sins. He said that he was the way to God, that he was the actual truth, and that he was life itself. And he said no one can get to God except through him. He said he was sent by God, that he came down from heaven. Again, think of any other teacher saying this. He claimed at one point that he existed before Abraham, which remember was 2,000 years before. He said he existed before Abraham. He said if you've seen him, you've actually seen God. And he said that he would judge the world at the end of time. He would be like the final judge of all humanity. And these are enormous things for anyone to say about themselves. And if anyone else said it, we'd be like, you're crazy. But does a crazy guy leave all these words behind that heal and mend all these people through history? And again, leave this wake of influence. When you combine this with what we talked about, these prophecies that talked about a certain kind of person coming and it matching him, you put it all together, it really shows you that Jesus is nothing normal, and that maybe you should take his claims seriously, as amazing as that sounds. So just think, if it's possible, then Jesus is all of this, and we are going to be judged by him. Think, how are we going to measure up? What standard would we be judged by? It says that when he judges us, all of our life and our thoughts will be like laid out. It's like it's all been on video. And he'll judge all of our actions, and not just our actions, but our thoughts and our motives, not just why we did things, or not just what we did, but why we did them. Jesus didn't affirm the ceremonial parts of the Old Testament as having to keep going, but he affirmed the moral parts, the moral way we ought to live. And he talked about a lot of things that put us in danger of judgment, the judgment that he's going to bring. And I just want to list some for you so you see. Very practical things like being disrespectful to parents. Which of us can say we've done incredible at that our whole lives? He talks about having hateful thoughts towards others. These things that go through our mind that are wishing ill on people around us, and not loving thoughts. He talks about having lustful thoughts about people we're not married to. These sexual thoughts about people that we're not married to. That we'll be judged if we've taken anything that doesn't belong to us. If we don't tell the truth, if we've told lies, which, if you're honest, you've told a lot of lies in your life. I have. And murder, obviously, most people would agree. He also says people doing religious things like prayer and fasting and giving to the poor. Those are all great things. But he says when people have done these things to impress people instead of actually to love God or to love people, that's something they'll be judged by. Engaging in any sexual activity outside a marriage of one man and one woman. All of that we call fornication, but he said all of that, something will be judged by. Even talks about being jealous. When we have jealousy in our heart for what people around us have, and when we speak harmfully of others, we've all used our mouth to break people down. The most serious command Jesus said you could break. He said the number one command was that you should love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, all of your strength. Basically, with all you are, you should love God. You're only breathing right now because He's let you have breath. But if we're honest, most of us wake up, and most of the world wakes up and gives God not a second thought. They don't ask at all what He wants from them. Let alone give Him all their love. Jesus said that was the first and the greatest command. And all of us have broken that every day of our life. If Jesus is legit and we're going to be judged by Him, by His standard, we're in terrible trouble. I'm not trying to just be heavy for no reason, but I want you to realize again how serious these truths are. But I promise I won't leave you on a low note. Anyway, to complete looking at Jesus' life in an overview here, towards the end of His life, He predicts at least 3 times. He tells the people close to Him that He's going to be betrayed, and He's going to be tried, in a trial, and He's going to be killed. And amazingly, He also says, but on the 3rd day after that, He's going to come back to life. And it says that they didn't really know what to make of that, it's kind of awkward anyway. If someone tells you, I'm going to go get killed, you kind of don't know how to respond. And then to also have Him saying, and by the way, my body's going to start breathing again a few days later. It's just not normal stuff. It says that His followers just didn't know what to make of it. But it ends up going on to happen that way. Basically, some of the Jews, the Jewish leaders, the Jewish religious leaders, these hypocrite types, they were really jealous, it says, because all these people were giving loyalty to Jesus and they were losing status. And so they convince the Romans, remember who were in charge, that He needed to be executed as a criminal. And so that's what the Romans did. That's how they executed their criminals. They took Him and they nailed Him up on these crosses. So outside of Jerusalem, Jesus was nailed to a cross, and ironically, the day He was being nailed to the cross was the same day that the Jews were celebrating a festival. And in that festival, animals were being sacrificed as a picture of the trade of their sin being paid for. It was like this animal paying my fine for breaking God's laws. And right when they're doing this festival, there's someone outside of the city being killed. And you may have heard these verses before. It says, but He, about Jesus, He was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins, and He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. Many people don't realize that even though those words perfectly describe what Christians believe and what Jesus did, again, they were written down 700 years before he came in the book of Isaiah. So those words perfectly ahead of time predicted this trade that would take place, that Jesus would be paying for the rebellion of mankind. The Old Testament scriptures have talked about how God is a God of unbending justice. If there's wrong, it has to be punished, because that's what a good judge does. A good judge punishes wrong. But it also said that God loves to forgive and he loves to be merciful. So how does a God who has unbending justice but who loves to be merciful, how does he mix those two things? And the answer is the cross. That when Jesus died, it was like God saying, I hate this sin. Not just for what it did to me, but also for what you all did to each other for your sin. I hate it and I want to punish it. But I'm going to step in and do it myself. I'm going to pay the fine for it. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was paying the fine for you and I having a rebellion against God, so that God's justice could be satisfied, but we could be offered forgiveness. So they had falsely accused Jesus of all these things, but it says that he just stayed silent. And, they made a crown out of these sharp thorns and put it on his head, and they were beating him and saying, oh yeah, hail the King of the Jews, just mocking him. And they were spitting in his face and beating him. They took him out and whipped him. They would do this. They'd have these horrible whips that would just shred all the, skin and muscles and stuff in your back till it was just ripped open. And then they took him outside the city, and like I say, they hammered him up onto a cross, nails in his hands, nails in his feet. And usually you'd die that way because every time you needed a breath, you'd have to stand up on those feet that were nailed to the cross. And eventually you wouldn't have the strength or the will to push through the pain and keep taking breaths. And so he was on that cross for 6 hours. And it says that they also stabbed a spear through his side. And at the end of the day, the Roman executioners had to make sure him and the other 2 guys who were getting killed that day had to make sure they were dead. They knew what they were doing. They were executioners. And once he was declared dead, this well-connected guy who had respect for Jesus, his name was Joseph, he took Jesus' body. He got permission to take Jesus' body and to go put it into a tomb that this guy owned. So Jesus' followers were obviously crushed and confused with the death of Jesus. But the accounts say that a couple of days later, some women of Jesus that were close with Jesus. They went to the tomb. They were going to put spices on his body and stuff. And when they got there, he was in a tomb that had this 2,000 pound stone that would roll over. And so they would need someone to help them open it up. But when they got there, it was open and Jesus' body wasn't there. And an angel told them that Jesus has come back to life. He is risen like he said he would be. And they ran back to tell a bunch of the other followers who mostly didn't believe them, until some of them ran back and confirmed themselves. This is kind of important because if you're going to make up a story, like this is an amazing story, if you're going to make up a story in their day, you wouldn't have women being the ones to be the first to report this fact, because in their day, unfortunately, women didn't even have, their testimony didn't even count in court. But the Bible records it this way because that's apparently how it happened, that it was women first who found the tomb empty, and so they get the honor of doing that. So they run back, and basically in the following weeks, Jesus starts coming to them and appearing to them, and not just as a phantom, but he eats food with them. He lets them touch the holes in his hands and his feet. And but at the same time, he's not normal. He just walks into the room through the wall. I mean, crazy things. At some points, he's appearing to more than like 500 people at one time, which is important because some people say maybe these people, they wanted it to be true, they're having hallucinations, but usually hallucinations aren't a group event, with 500 people. And some of the other New Testament writings say that, hey, some of these 500 are still alive. Go check it out with them if you have trouble and you need to hear an eyewitness testimony. So then you got to ask, okay, what do we do with all this? This is crazy. Maybe the followers of Jesus say they stole the body so they could make up all these stories. That's why the tomb was empty. Well, the thing is, these leaders of this movement, they weren't like these charlatans today who are trying to milk people for money and flying around in private jets. These guys lived very uncomfortable, difficult lives to hold to this truth. It didn't make them rich and famous in, the way some people are using it today too. So you'd have to ask, well, what would the motive be? And would these people go to their deaths, as many of them did, to protect a lie that was supposed to benefit them? Other people say, well, maybe it was the Romans or the Jewish leaders who took the body out of the tomb, and then it just started all these rumors. Well, that doesn't make a ton of sense either, because you see that the Jewish people are so kind of freaked out and frustrated when they hear about this. And the Romans are also a bit bothered. So if they could have just shown the body, hey, we have the body, it's not true, it would have solved a lot of problems for them. There's been a lot of different people who've tried to come up with different scenarios of how to make sense of this historical information to explain away the idea that maybe this really happened. There are experts in law, some of them very awarded for their professional status in law. People like Dr. Simon Greenleaf and J. Warner Wallace. They've concluded that if you took basically what we have in the documents here and used all the normal rules of evidence we use in our courts of law, you would have to conclude that Jesus actually coming to life is the best explanation we have of what happened. And after all, something drove this movement forward, because we're still here sitting in the 21st century with it having moved forward. As amazing as it sounds, maybe that is the best explanation of why Jesus has had the impact and is still having the impact that he has, if he truly is alive and still doing things in the world. Even today, there's people in countries all over the world who are telling stories of things Jesus has done in their life. There's people who haven't even heard of Jesus who have him appear to them in their dreams, a lot in the Middle Eastern countries. There's so many stories of people when they surrendered to Jesus, kind of took him as their king, that he came and changed their life completely, that drug and alcohol addictions, things like that, were just broken off. Depression and anxiety and, uncontrolled anger and pornography addiction, sexual addiction of all kinds, that people have these testimonies of when they surrendered to Jesus, he changed these things either directly or as a process. Obviously there's people who make up stories. I've seen this before. There's people who make up stories because, they want to get a crowd and have an interesting story. But then, do you really believe all these people in all these cultures through all this history have been making up all of these things? Also, in recent history, many people have had the tragedy that they've had to flee their home countries because of wars and, these problems going on. And, what countries do they usually try to flee to? I find this quite interesting that, I don't know if they're aware of it or not, but often you see that they're trying to get to the countries that have been most shaped by the message of Jesus and the Bible. And this isn't because these countries are perfect. They have tons of problems. But, these places are the places that have had their worldview shaped by Jesus and what he taught in the Bible. These things like treating all people as equals, that's not standard common knowledge in all societies. These things like the idea that rulers themselves should be under laws and they should be servants of people rather than these dictators. And this idea that truth should be valued above all things and that everyone should have the right to learn. These are the ideas that came wherever, again, Jesus and the Bible had a strong impact on a culture. If you think about it, so many other worldviews and mindsets, things like Buddhism and atheism and the Islamic worldview, these things have not created the kinds of cultures that people are trying to get to. And I'm not saying that to be rude. I'm just saying they haven't generally. Even Catholicism, which again is a branch of Christianity, Catholicism started from the beginning out of truly following Jesus. But over time it became this big machine and this loyalty to religiousness and this power structure rather than simply following and obeying Jesus. And that's one of the things that led it to become something that could cause things like the Crusades to happen. And you see, even those areas of the world that have been dominated by Catholicism, they haven't had the same blessing as these areas that have continued to be influenced by Jesus himself and the Bible. Sadly, most of these countries in the West are rapidly leaving their trust in Jesus and the Bible, and I think it's putting us in a kind of scary situation where all the things we thought were common sense and normal knowledge are not going to continue to stand as we leave these ideas. I personally think that part of the point of what I just mentioned is exactly back to that promise of Abraham, that someone from his family would come and would bless all the nations. And you see all over the world, wherever people embrace Jesus and take him and his words seriously, it brings blessing to their life. And it's happening in nations everywhere. Jesus, the king that was promised to David, that was promised through Daniel, he has come and he's started his kingdom and he's been building it one heart at a time, hearts that are loyal to him, not a political system, hearts that are loyal to him, and he's brought blessing into their lives as they've chosen to follow him. And Jesus said he's going to come back someday, and like I say, he's going to judge the world one day, and until that time, he's told those of us who follow him to spread the message. So again, that's why I said in the beginning, I feel so obligated to share this message with you. You see now some of the reasons why I'm so convinced, okay? And part of those are the exterior facts, but I also have my own personal experience of walking with Jesus, and I see that he's for real, and he wants you to know he's for real, and that he sees everything that's messed up in your heart, but he's paid for it, and if you will submit to him and take him as your king, he will also forgive you. He's already paid the price for it. And again, that message, repent, the kingdom of heaven. Be a part of the kingdom of heaven. Remember, this is not just like religious ideas that people came up with. We have all of this data. Do you really think it's total coincidence, all those things that lined up? There's a guy or some people that did a study calculating, because there's all these prophecies about Jesus. We looked at a few of them, but they calculated, if just 8 of them, because there's way more than that, if just 8 of them came true of one person, what would the statistical odds of that be? And the number they came up with, I'm not smart enough to do this kind of math myself, but it's 2.8 times 10 to the 28th power. So just long string of zeros. That's the chance that one person could fulfill 8 of those criteria in the prophecies of this coming king. And again, what are the chances that that same guy is the same guy we're looking back on and saying, this is one of the most influential guys in history? I hope you can see, to become a Christian isn't to brain dead believe something. It's to actually add up things and say, yeah, I don't know everything, but I'm going to put my trust in this Jesus, and I see I need his forgiveness. So I think if you're honest that you have more than enough evidence to realize Jesus is not something normal, and he's probably what he says he is. And now you need to decide whether you're with him or against him. You need to make a decision. Some of you may say, well, I see what you mean, Isaac. It's a lot more than I thought as far as reasons to believe this, but I still have stuff I'm hung up on. Well, then I challenge you to seek out answers to those things. If you know me, you can reach out to me and I'll help you seek out those answers. If you don't, I'll try to have links in this video so you can do some research on your own. But again, I hope you see what I just showed you isn't just one little thing. It's a big string of things that are all connected and that all point to the greatness of Jesus. And you really need to decide if you're going to ignore all this now that you've seen it. And to that, you have the right to do that. But the consequences are yours. Either Jesus has paid for your sin because you're his follower, or you have to pay for it. And that's, the worst thing I can think of. No matter how many horrible things you've done, how jacked up you've been, Jesus is willing to take you. And he's already paid for it. But I want to challenge you. You can't just add Jesus. I'm not going to put the bar down low and say, oh, yeah, it doesn't matter. If you don't want to take this seriously yet, just try it out. No. Jesus said, if you want to be his disciple, his follower, you have to put him above everything, above your family, your friends, your kids, yourself, your own desire, your whole life. He has to be in charge of it all. And so if you're not willing to do that, you're not ready to become a Christian. It's only when you give him full control of your life that you get a life with him and that he can do what he does in your life. So if any of you are actually, you realize and you're realizing, wow, I've got sin, this messed up stuff in my life. I see how messed up I am, and I see how for real Jesus is. And I want to take him as my king. I want to follow him. I want to have forgiveness. He invites you to do so. And if that's where you're at, I would encourage you to just get on your knees and admit to him, all the things you can think of that he probably hates. Say, I'm so sorry for this. I'm sorry for this. I want to turn away from all this. I want to learn to follow you. And say, I want you to be king of my life, But the first act you do to show you're with King Jesus is to go get baptized, to get dunked in water. That's the way Jesus set it up. That you go, you find some Christians, and when you get baptized, it's like when you go in the water, it's like you saying, I'm dead to my old way of living. When you come out of the water, it's like you saying, I'm alive to this new life in Christ. And you're publicly saying it to some Christians, to angels and demons, and most importantly to God, that I'm with you, dead to the old way, and I want to walk with Jesus now. And God will take you seriously, and he will give you his Holy Spirit. Say, fill me with your Spirit, God. And from that moment, know that you belong to God now. Your sin has been paid for. You don't need to fear death. God has paid for all of your wrongs. So start to learn to walk with him again, just like back in the Garden of Eden. To let him and his wisdom in the Bible rule you. His words rule you. Talk to him all the time. Read the Bible all the time. And find some serious Christians to do life with. I know it may be hard sometimes to tell the difference between a real Christian and a fake Christian. I just encourage you to try to find people who you sense they fear God in the way that they really take him seriously, but that they also love God. You see that he's actually what they love. And people that study the Bible. They don't just look at one verse all the time. It's okay every now and then, but that these people are trying to actually read through the Bible, study it, and learn to obey and follow Jesus. Learn to live with God and his people and let him have his way in your life. And spread the message whenever you get the chance. Wow, if you've made it this far, I just want to thank you for being so kind to spend so much time listening to this. I hope it's worth your time. And I want you to know, whether you are an enemy or whether you're a friend or a foe, I just want you to know I genuinely love you. And I really hope that every last one of you realizes the truth of Jesus and turns their life, your life, over to him. I love you, and I pray God would bless you. Jesus is coming again someday. I don't know how long. Might be really short, might be really long. But he's there, and he's waiting for you. God bless you.